So, The Last of Us. This is a show that I know you and I have both been eagerly anticipating. As a matter of fact, it's been eagerly anticipated by so many people. The Last of Us truly is one of the most popular video games of all time. It's one of the most acclaimed video games of all time. And part two actually just dropped a couple of years ago. And I think continuing in the trend and the legacy of that franchise, it was heavily lauded, critically praised by most people, a little bit more divisive, but certainly I think still regarded as one of the best video game experiences that we've seen in quite some time. And so it was really no surprise that HBO decided to pick up this adaptation of The Last of Us. Now, we know a few years ago, PlayStation decided to create a new initiative, PlayStation Studios, to embark on adapting a lot of their popular video game franchises. We've already just started to see some of those things and what they look like. Last year, we got the Uncharted movie. They have the God of War series that's coming out on Amazon Prime in a few years that we've talked about. But The Last of Us is really, I think, kind of the first big firing shot of what this new project is going to entail. What's interesting, though, about The Last of Us is that they've taken a stab at this project before. It's actually been in development hell for quite a while. It's had two different film adaptations, one that was actually going to be helmed by Sam Raimi, but that ultimately fell through. And over the course of these past few years, they finally have been able to get this series off and running. And it's been filming for quite a while in Canada over the past couple of years. And Craig Mazin is coming off of Chernobyl, his critically acclaimed HBO limited series. Neil Druckmann, we also know, is the co-president of Naughty Dog and also behind the creative team of the first Last of Us video game. So we have certainly the caliber and the pedigree of a really incredible team behind the series to bring this to life. Before we talk about the series premiere and what we thought about this opening episode, because there's a lot to get into, I do just want to talk a little bit about the show and how it came to be, and just also the industry and where we're sort of headed with this, sort of new era of video game adaptations that we've seen, because you and I both know we've seen quite a lot of them. Video game adaptations into live action or even into animated just have not always worked. They've had a very, very checkered history, going all the way back to the Super Mario Brothers movie of the early 90s, which is one of the worst, most egregious movies ever made. It's the less said about it, the better. And then, subsequently, we've gotten a few things here and there that have, shown some glimmers of hope. The most recent Sonic films from Paramount have been doing really well. The Detective Pikachu movie was actually pretty impressive. There have been things that have been great and have, started to touch greatness at least. And then we've also had some other things that have been successful, but maybe not from a quality perspective the greatest. The Resident Evil franchise, the film franchise, made a lot of money. Quality wise, I think that can be debated depending on the movie that you're talking about, but they've also made another movie and another series. We've seen a lot of these things, but what are your thoughts just about the current landscape of video game adaptations? Because I don't know, to me, it feels like we're entering somewhat of a turning point. It's starting to feel like that maybe the industry is starting to get how to do this, because it's taken so long and there have been so many bad examples, but it's starting to finally feel like that we are on the precipice of something great. What do you think about that?
I think there's just been something, in the water, that a lot of the reasons why a lot of those early movies just don't work out from a quality perspective is no one really viewed video games as a serious thing for a long time. You know what I mean? It was never like, video games are always, oh, why are you doing that? Why are you playing video games? Or that's childish, or that's gaming in general has grown more popular over the years. It just is what it is. Like, of course, it's always been, decently big, but what it is now is a whole nother, I think, kind of ball game. When you talk about video games, we can discuss God of War in public and everyone knows exactly what you're talking about. That not even had to have played the game, they know what it is. You know what I mean? And it's just becoming, I think, more popular to game in general, and I think that's helping all of this. Not only that, but more mature games have come out as gaming has progressed in technology. I think it now makes more sense for people to start adapting these things, as people would love to do the cinematography of a game where they actually paid attention to the cinematography inside the game. You know what I mean? There's art direction in games that have been growing. There's concepts in games that have been getting more mature and darker that they're able to convey better. And I think it's all just kind of growing with the time. And I think, part of the turning point we're getting now is, one, the understanding of movie companies and all these other companies that are like, video game is a pretty big industry, we should probably tap into. And not only that, but gaming in general is something that people are, starting to tap into more heavily, because we talk about all the time, the games we've been playing feel like playable movies. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, we're going through God of War. Like, is this a movie or a video game? Like, what is this? And I think that's helping the industry grow as a unit. Of course, there's the early, video game adaptations. I'm thinking Silent Hill, you know what I'm saying, and Mortal Kombat. A lot of those earlier adaptations where they people go to see them. They have their cult followings, but they're not as widespread. But now there's this mature story that comes along that some other things have laid groundwork for it. The Walking Dead has existed. We know that as a comic can exist. Now we're here sitting with The Last of Us, and people understand it to be a mature storyline. It's very much dark. It's very much also beautifully made in terms of story. But now that part two has coming out, the art direction is phenomenal. You know what I mean? Like things we see things in this game. They're like, man, that will look really good in a movie. That look really good on TV or the big screen. And I think we're starting to understand what that looks like, man. And so, man, there's just things leading up to this moment, I think, that made it possible. All those movies I said, the Sonics that have come out in recent years have been like, dang, people really go see these movies. We should probably tap into these things. We talked about how Amazon ordered the God of War series. Another thing that is on the horizon that like helps these things get made. Ready Player One, like there's just all these factors I think that goes into how we get here into this Last of Us series, man. But all in all, I'm happy we're getting here. I'm happy that we're in a time where these things, these video game adaptations are being taken seriously. People are putting money into them, and now I think it's time to get down to the nitty gritty of what it looks like to adapt a video game.
Right. And, the industry as a whole, all studios and even the streamers themselves are desperately looking for pre-existing IP that people are already familiar with, these projects and these IPs that have built-in fan bases. And where else better to tap into that market than video games, as you said, which have grown tremendously in popularity over the past, I would say 10 years. It's been a really, really critical and watershed moment for the video game industry, in which we are seeing some of these more mature adaptations come about, where the technology has allowed for the capabilities to just be taken to new heights, and the budgets have grown and the teams have grown. There's just more opportunity. And so when you see a video game like The Last of Us come out a decade ago and do so well, that's because, that couldn't really be achieved in 1997, when they were making those first Tomb Raider games. And so when they make a Tomb Raider movie, Lara Croft Tomb Raider, they're working off of a limited vision, a limited budget and resources, and they really have to kind of craft and build a story from scratch, really, if we're being honest about it. There's not a lot of source material, quote unquote, to pull from unless there's like other media that's been tapped into. And I think that's been the case with a lot of these adaptations. But these projects like Assassin's Creed and The Last of Us and God of War, these are really rich, deep franchises that have created in multiple interpretations and have continued to iterate upon their stories for, decades now at this point. And so I think that just opens up the widespread opportunities of what's available. Now, at a certain point, I do think there's going to be possibly somewhat of an availability issue. Like there's only so many games that have achieved this particular level, for right? Sure. And I think that there's going to be a moment in time where we have to sort of reckon with that we might not get these things as fast as superhero films, which there's just unlimited source material, and just the pipeline for that stuff is just moving so much faster. But it could get there. I think that there's still definitely a moment where we could see that possibly happen if they're good, but that just has to be a level of quality that's sustained over the years. But also, in addition to video games and adaptations becoming more frequent, zombies in pop culture has been a mainstay for 70 years, really, if we're being honest about it. George Romero and Night of the Living Dead, like they've been able to remain a part of pop culture consciousness for the longest time. And I think the past 15 years has just been a really tremendous time for fans of zombies and what zombies represent in the mainstream. When you talk about TV shows and movies, there's just such a variety. You get those really serious sort of interpretations, movies like Dawn of the Dead or World War Z, which are also based off of other things. But we've even gotten, more comedic takes like Zombieland or Shaun of the Dead. Like there's a lot of variety there. And then, as you mentioned, The Walking Dead has been a television phenomenon for a very long time. They just concluded their 11th season, their final season, but by no means is it the end of The Walking Dead. They have multiple spinoffs. They have other things that are going to be coming down the pipeline that have been announced. And so we are in a time in which zombies in pop culture are a thing. The Last of Us deals with zombies to an extent. They're kind of zombie adjacent. There's a little bit more to them than just being the undead. But I think a lot of people would associate the creatures and the people that we see, sort of some of the antagonists as zombie like, right? And so this, I think that this fits within that conversation. What are your thoughts just about where we are right now? The fact that we do get a few movies every year that come out that focus on zombies. We do have a series like The Walking Dead, which kind of broke open the doors in terms of what's possible from long-term storytelling, and it just wrapped up to now The Last of Us seemingly maybe taking that spot, maybe becoming, the prominent zombie fixture in pop culture for at least the next few years.
Man, the only, weird caveat to that is Last of Us only has so much source material. You know what I mean? So I think that can only last so long. But overall, I absolutely love it. We talk about Night of the Living Dead and what George Romero did in that series, and being able to tell different meaningful stories with the undead or the infected that have other social commentary, I think is always an impressive thing to do. And in my mind, if you have some kind of commentary that you want to give or say, or there's a story within the overarching story of an infection that has some merit to it, that has something people can hold on to, I say tell it, man, and I'm going to be there to watch it almost every time. In again, in the sense of zombies, because it's very fun content. I think we all, in a lot of ways, what makes zombies and infections so cool is that's kind of the closest thing that's really possible. You watch some of these weird, crazy alien movies, you're like, okay, that's kind of far-fetched. But a lot of this is the content, to be honest, that feels like the closest to home. We just went through the pandemic, right? There's a ton of content that's going through the feels and the reactions of the pandemic. A lot of projects coming out talking about COVID, a lot of things coming out giving commentary on COVID. And I think even as Last of Us moves into this time, even as it happened before the pandemic, it not only foreshadowed kind of what the pandemic could look like a little bit, but now I think they're even going to be playing with some of that in the show post-pandemic. You know what I mean? Like, oh no, COVID actually happened. What about this thing? What about this idea in the TV show? And so I think there's always room for these stories to be told in pun intended Zombieland, in where there's just so much more to say, because again, that's what George Romero set out to do in the beginning. Like, don't never let anybody tell you zombies aren't political. You know what I'm saying? He did that on purpose. And so I'm again, if there's a story to be told, I'll be here to listen. And I think Last of Us will carry that torch for a couple of years. I really do think that's the case now that The Walking Dead is slowly fading away. Like you said, there's spinoffs and things, but in terms of the thing everybody's talking about, Last of Us is here, and it's here to take that spot.
Yeah, I think all the best stories have that commentary integrated into what the show or what the movie is really ultimately about, because that's been a part of the DNA and the fabric since the beginning, since we can really remember. And so The Last of Us continuing in that trend certainly makes sense. It was all apparent in the video game, and it's kind of frightening when you really think about it, that these things can really, for something that does appear so supernatural and unreal, how closely related and aligned it actually is to current times and just the things that we've dealt with as humans and an ongoing daily basis. It's like, well, yeah, there actually really might be something here. And like even the infected in The Last of Us, we know that it's actually kind of based out of something that is real. There is like a fungi that can grow and spread and all these different things. Like there's stuff that's rooted in reality and science that I think maybe some other genres try to tap into, but they're not always successful at. There's something, eerily scary about the idea of like people becoming infected or sick and things spreading. As you said, the pandemic is literally the translation of that in real life. And unfortunately, millions of people died from it. It doesn't result in, people growing fungi out of their face and running around, trying to eat people. But
right.
Who's to say it could never get that serious, right? Who's to say that there couldn't be something that's created in a lab that could cause people to just go fucking right? Like anything could just make people to go, lose their mind. And so I think that that's why they'll always persevere. The zombie genre, the genre about the medical field, the infected, like that stuff is always going to persevere because of just how close it feels, how based in reality it actually feels. Yeah. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this show has been in development hell, but finally it got a team behind it that could bring this to light and bring this show to make it ultimately what we're watching unfold right now on HBO. Craig Mazin has an incredible pedigree because of his work on Chernobyl, which came out a few years ago, a limited series I know we both watched, and it was highly acclaimed upon release. It's considered, really one of the landmark limited series that we've seen of the past, 15, 20 years, I think. And then Neil Druckmann, of course, is directly tied to The Last of Us as a franchise. You know, he's been
Yes.
there from the get-go. He is the co-president of Naughty Dog, which, you know, is also responsible for the Uncharted series. So he's been at least somewhat responsible for this kind of new video game revolution that we're seeing. A lot of the stuff you talked about earlier, just the maturity, the levels of advancement in technology, just everything that's starting to slowly become capable in the video game world. You know, what do you think about these two, you know, sort of teaming up to tell this story, and why are they the right people to do so?
Man, Craig Mazin is actually also in writing a movie, a Borderlands movie, which is like, this dude is going all in, with the video games. But he's been a pop culture guy for a long time. He did, I think, Hangover 2. He did a couple of scary movies later, the later scary movies. And after watching Chernobyl, man, it was one of those things where, like, this dude, I think, gets apocalypse, or, it's not necessarily an apocalypse, but you know what I mean? He gets tragedy, and he gets like this big event that happens that can ruin people's lives. And that's what The Last of Us is. This big event happens. It quite literally ruins people's lives. But I think those two things combined, Chernobyl and the idea of like doing a Borderlands and the Hangover, I think he just gets what it means to write a series like this. And the success of Chernobyl, I think absolutely led him here, because again, it's dealing with very similar themes and very similar, really, horror. It's dealing with very similar horror in terms of what it looks like when something goes wrong, and the people that have to feel those effects. Neil Druckmann, man, he's been here, done that. The Last of Us is his baby. He wasn't only one of the main people at Naughty Dog, but like, this was legit his baby. Like, he wrote The Last of Us, you know what I'm saying, in help be the creative director for that video game. And so I can only imagine how it is first directing a video game and then coming in here and trying to direct a series. And it looks like he's done, some of those things before, or worked with some other series in the past, but this is like the one for him. This is his baby. And I don't think I've ever seen anybody carry anything from video game to actual television show in terms of being the writer and director of both. And so it's, in my mind, it's like, who better else to get to do this thing than Neil Druckmann, who has been here and done that. And again, this is his baby, the thing that he wrote. And so I'm just excited to see the person who created the vision in the first place is carrying out the vision as well. We get a lot of video game adaptations that aren't like that. You know what I mean? Some of the creators may not be alive, or writers of certain storylines in video games may not be alive. Some of them just weren't involved in the project, like a studio may have got greenlit to do a movie, but none of those people who made the original video game were involved. Like, a lot of that stuff tends to happen, but Neil Druckmann is like, no, I'm here, and this is my baby for The Last of Us. So obviously he's like the person for the job. So yeah, I'm excited to see where he can take this TV show.
Yeah, Craig Mazin showed a particular ability to show what humanity's undoing of itself could look like with Chernobyl.
Mm-hmm.
That is a real life catastrophe that actually happened, which is horrific and, oddly not talked about that much anymore. And then when you watch the show, I think a lot of people grew up maybe hearing about it, maybe in a textbook, you heard about Chernobyl, but you never really understood, well, what happened here? Like, what went down? And then you watch that series, and I rewatched it before watching this, and it's still fucking works. It's crazy just how horrific the whole thing is. And again, I think you just, sort of look at some of the monstrosities or the atrocities of man and what they ultimately result into. The Last of Us is dealing with all that exact same stuff. Like, yes, it's not based in reality per se. It's not based off of a real incident, but a lot of similar themes that are occurring in that series that we ultimately see with our main characters, because it is about the humanity of it. It is about the people, involved in this, and much less about whatever the catastrophe is or whatever the incident is. It's kind of more about people's reactions to it and what it does to them, and ultimately how it consumes them and affects them over the course of their lives. And so it all makes sense, why they got these people. It's really kind of the perfect combo. Neil Druckmann is coming in here, and I know he was very much, sort of unabashedly saying that certain things have to be in the show. Like, we have to do it a certain type of way. And what's interesting is that he initially thought that this was going to be a movie. And then you get a guy like Craig Mazin coming from the TV side of things recently saying like, no, wait a second, we need time to let this breathe, because this is about the journey of these characters. We can't do this in 2.5 hours or 2.5 hours. Like, we actually have to go on this journey, experience this over the course of multiple hours. And so we get 9 episodes with this first season, which I think is going to be the perfect format for this particular story. On the other side of things, in front of the camera, just as important as probably the creators, are the actors. And we have Joel and Ellie as our main characters from the video game being portrayed by Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey.
Mhm.
Now, the casting news for this show came out a couple of years ago, and I think there was a lot of general excitement about Pedro Pascal. I feel like I saw him fan casted a lot before he was officially announced. I feel like people kind of knew, like, yeah, he might be the perfect guy. Bella Ramsey, not necessarily the same story. There's been a lot of, feedback and chatter about her, some
Mhm.
criticism, if we're just being honest about it, based on looks and appearances and whatever else the case may be. But how do you feel about these two, sort of coming into the story, being really the shepherds of the narrative that's unfolding on screen, since they are so integral to what we're seeing happen?
Yeah, man. I mean, it's first and foremost, Pedro Pascal is the year of him. I kind of talked about how last year was a lot of Jenna Ortega. This year we're gonna be seeing a lot of Pedro between this show and the Mandalorian. I think shoot, whatever he has, else to do this year, but the man is working, and he just happens to have a Joel look, and it really works out because of course he has the acting chops to go along with it. So I was very much excited to see him actually get casted. Because it's funny. A lot of times you see fan cast, and a lot of times when I see a fan cast, I just assume that person is not going to be it, because that's usually what happens, right? Like somebody, you're like, oh dang, they're not going to be it, but nope. Pedro Pascal actually got casted, and he's here, to do the work. But I think he's perfect, man. He's been around, and he's been doing such good work, that I at this point, in a lot of ways I couldn't really imagine anybody else, just because really social media hammered it into my head too, like Pedro Pascal, Pedro Pascal. And I was like, dang, yeah, this dude just has to be Joel now. Like I can't see it any other way. You talk about Bella Ramsey as Ellie, and I'm kind of on the fence a little bit in respects to kind of what you were saying. I see why, like, people are like, she don't look that much like Ellie. I'm kind of in that same mind, but I know she has the acting chops to bring Ellie to life. And I think that's what I'm more interested in. It's a video game adaptation, you know what I'm saying? Like they over here making people that don't exist, just like any other adaptation is. So I think it still is going to get certain taken used to, because some of those cutscenes are so good. You know what I mean? Some of those cutscenes are like, man, I have a vision of Ellie in my head, and she doesn't quite fit it 100%. But I know over time, as the show goes on, I'm like, nah, that's Ellie. You know what I mean? Like, she has the acting chops. Her and Joel have this relationship. I'm going to get used to it very soon. So I'm actually not worried at all about it. But I do see what other people are saying about the way she looks a little bit. But I think everybody will get used to it too. At the end of the day, you can't complain about it. She's already been casted. She's already in the show. So
And that's the
not much to
thing.
add there.
Yeah, and that's the
Mhm.
thing. You have to cast the best actor for the role, regardless of the looks per se. Like, yeah, she doesn't exactly look like what they designed in the video games, but if she embodies the spirit of Ellie and what we're supposed to get out of that character,
Mhm.
that's supposed to, sort of trump everything else in terms of how we identify her and how we sort of associate our relationship with her. If you did play the video games, and if you didn't play the video games, it really doesn't fucking matter, because you
Oh
don't
yeah,
have any
at
of those
all.
preconceived notions, right? So it
Exactly.
doesn't make any difference, I think, to a new person coming into this world. And so if she just steps up and does the job that she's supposed to do, which I'd say, based off of what we saw in episode 1, she absolutely does, then there's really nothing to worry about. But with all
Mhm.
of that out the way and all that said, man, let's just talk about episode 1 and get into our thoughts about it. I think in terms of spoilers, this is difficult because we're talking about something that's coming from a video game that's been out for a while. I don't want to spoil anything later down the line that people might not have tapped into if they didn't play the video game.
Mhm.
So let's save anything, in terms of outcomes and just like ultimately what the story unfolds to be over the course of the video game, and even in part 2. And let's just focus on episode 1 and talk about the
Yeah.
details. I think we can do like slight spoilers, mention some things,
Mhm.
and just kind of talk about it that way. But with episode 1, we come right out of the gate, really, I think, firmly placing us in the world that we kind of expected, and one of the differences and the changes that they made this time around is actually placing us back in 2003, as opposed to the
Yeah.
video game. We were placed in the present day when it came out 2013. We actually go back in time because there is a time jump that happens in the story, 20 years. And so when we do take the time jump, it happens to, fast forward to present day 2023. And so we get a tale of, I think, two different shows that happen here, which is what we kind of expected. The beginning, which is a really, really extended prologue, and then we kind of ease ourselves into what's happening and unfolding in the present day. But what were your overall thoughts about everything you saw? This was a really extended episode, 85 minutes, so it was a pretty long series premiere. What did you
Mhm.
think about just everything and how it unfolded, and just also how, much it leaned into what we saw in the opening moments of the video game 10 years ago?
Yeah, man. First of all, shout out to Nico Parker as Sarah, man. Like, you really have to nail the role of Sarah. You really have to get the audience, I think, to buy in enter the world of Sarah in order for this first episode to work, in order really for the beginning of the game to work too. You kind of enter the same world of Sarah versus the video game. You kind of start where it's the night of everything going down, right? Versus here, you kind of get a whole day to kind of spend with Nico Parker as Sarah, where you can learn to in some ways fall in love with her as Joel's daughter, and so I commend Nico Parker, I think, for what she did in this first episode. I think she did a tremendous job, and I appreciate what she gave us there, man. But I love kind of the world that they enter us in, because this is everything that happens in this first episode is what sets the tone, not only again for the series, but this is the recreation of what sets the tone for the two video game series. And so I love that we're spending time with this. Talk about Craig Mazin's like, whoa, slow down, we need to spend some time with this. I love that this is the decision here, because now I'm like, this is Sarah's personality. This is who she is. She's going next door to the neighbors. You know what I mean? Like, this was Joel's whole daughter. And to be able, I think, to spend this amount of time with her is very important to where we end up. And yeah, I liked it. I loved it. I love the little Easter eggs that they put in. I'll give away one Easter egg. What happens is when they're running and all the pandemonium is happening in the original video game, a car comes in and hits them. That's how they get into a car crash. But instead here they use an airplane. I thought that was a cool switch up, because I was like, oh, here it go. And then it doesn't happen. They pretend like it happens. And I was like, okay, but what's going to happen? And then they end up getting hit by the plane debris. I thought that was really interesting. But there's a lot of already cool callbacks to the show itself. We have the two doctors talking in the beginning about disease and stuff, and they're talking about planes, and then we move on to that scene, and there's a plane, and there's a ton of planes going down, and I don't know, I can already tell that they're handling the show with care in terms of the writing and the way that they want to convey things, and I'm really appreciative about that in this first episode. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think in adaptation speak, a lot of what we'll see here, and it was noticeably present in the first episode, and I think we'll continue to see it, are the expansion of ideas and the expansion of certain themes and elements that maybe weren't as present in the video game, but they're becoming a little bit more of a fixture in the series. And as you said, that opening, I thought, was just so masterfully done, which takes us back to 1968. And they talk about the possibility of a fungal virus that can spread and what that would look like. And it being the result of global warming, essentially. The fact that that's some shit we're responsible for as humans. Like, that's our fault. And so we are kind of creating this virus that's going to end up being a global pandemic sort of situation. And so I just love that they really hearken to that. And then you fast forward to the point in which you talked about just the opening prologue with Nico Parker as Sarah and just everything that she had to do. They really did a masterful job at establishing that relationship with her for a character that has a tragic end, unfortunately, and that we don't spend that much time with, but they make you care about her by going to school with her, seeing her ride the bus, seeing her spend time with her father, Joel. And she's also like his caretaker. She's taking care of him. She's making him breakfast, and she's making sure, like, don't forget your cake. It's your birthday. Like, make sure you bring that home. Like, she's actually looking after him, which I found that interesting too. But it was nice to see just all those moments where they had things that were expanded or different from the video game, but then you also still had the moments where it's like, oh, they are just recreating the same exact dialogue verbatim, like the whole couch sequence verbatim. That's exactly what they did. And I'm just like, they are weaving in and out of the stuff just in the best ways possible. As we talk about the present day and just like where things end up, like the real main storyline of the show is the fact that Joel has to now become sort of a caretaker for Ellie, and it's revealed, at the end of this whole thing, is that she is immune to whatever disease is spreading. She's been bitten, and she's basically lasted 3 weeks without any side effects so far. And so she is responsible for being the cure to some extent. So we get that relationship established between these two early on in this game, or excuse me, in this series, and we see just like how that unfolds. But Joel is a hardened man. He's different based off of what happened to him at the top of the show. He's 20 years older, 20 years wiser, but also 20 years probably more beat down. And the world has been just nothing but cruel to him. And they live in this post-apocalyptic society. And now he has to be responsible for this young girl that he doesn't want to be responsible for. But I think we see by the end of this, something takes over him. Something changes in him where he becomes that protector. It becomes more raw and visceral, where it's like, he's not really asking questions anymore. I think that natural instinct kicks in of him being a father, at least what that used to feel like for him. And that's reflected in the game into the show. But what did you think about just the impetus and just the genesis of that relationship that we start to see between Joel and Ellie build out in this show?
Yeah, man. There was just, when Joel first meets Ellie, again, you can tell it's not, the best. She like tries to stab him. It's like a lot going on, and they clearly, don't get along. But part of that is, I think, because they are very similar in a lot of different ways, to where they're not in a place to become attached to anybody. Joel is very much, that dude is broken. He doesn't know what to do and where to go and who to attach to. But it's something about, he when he meets Ellie, he's like, no, I can't do this again. A little girl, I can't. Like, I can't possibly take on another daughter figure and lose her too. I can't do both. It's just not going to happen for me. And so it's crazy to see him be put in position where he has to, like, he doesn't really have a choice, because it's for, not only his survival, but what he later finds out down the line is for the survival of the world. And so it's I don't know, it's always so interesting and crazy to see how it plays in the video game versus how it plays out here. There's certain acting things that you can do here that you're not going to get in the game. And I really love, I think, how it's playing out, man. But you can see that protector that does come out. You kind of talk about how Sarah was the caretaker of him, and he's never really learned how to completely, I think, be Sarah's dad, if that makes sense. Like, of course, they had a great relationship. He was a good dad, don't get me wrong. But like, her making him eggs is like, are you sure that's how that's supposed to go, kind of type thing. But it kind of almost feels like that when Ellie comes around, she has enough similars to Joel where he's like, dang, maybe I have to, kind of take the reins a little bit and do some things for you that you don't know how to do. And so it's very interesting to see how even a man as old as Joe is has to kind of kick in and become and learn how to take care of somebody that he's never really had to learn how to do before.
Yeah, I think what's always just been most fascinating in playing the video game about the relationship between Joel and Ellie is how much you grow to love them, and you grow to love the kinship that they have towards each other, and the fact that they really do love each other. We see that, but it's a really bumpy road to get there. It's not clean. It's not easy. They talk mad shit to each other. Like, Ellie's mouth is wild as fuck. She says anything. But while you grow to love them and you grow to become really affectionate for them, there's also this element that they're kind of incendiary towards each other, or for each other, I should say. Like, they're not, I don't know if they're that good for each other. And I've always felt that way, just because we know what happens, right? We know what ultimately unfolds, and it's really, really unfortunate. And I think the thing is that these two people are both coming into each other's lives at a very vulnerable moment. Ellie, we know based off of what just happened to her prior to the events of this show, which they will cover later down in the season. Joel, obviously, the tragedy in his life. And now they're coming into each other's lives at this very vulnerable moment, which in a way is good, but also in a way it's bringing out maybe some of the worst attributes about them as well. Some of the things that aren't the most admirable. And there's a morality and a greatness that we kind of have to be uncomfortable with and live in for quite a while, and question, like, well, did he do the right thing there? Was that the way to go? And I guarantee you by the end of this, we're going to be asking all those questions like, yo, that you couldn't have done that. You didn't really do that, did you? And so I think that that's just always going to be the looming feeling that we have with those two. And I just love that, yes, we'll grow to love them, and yes, we'll have this affection for them, but there's always like a sense of dread because you can just tell that some of the decisions being made, while they might be best for the characters in that specific moment, they have consequences and repercussions that are going to be vastly felt for quite a while over the course of this story and what they tend to do. As we just sort of wrap up here, I do just want to get your thoughts and impressions as two guys who have played the video game. What are you just most looking forward to about the rest of the series? We have 8 more episodes. And I think, in the best way that you can, talking around like specific stuff, but we know that certain characters are coming. We know that they are going to cover certain storylines. The Left Behind, which was a DLC pack in the first game, will be covered later down in this upcoming season. What are some of the things that you were just like, oh, I can't wait until they get to that part, because that moment in the video game is so iconic. I can't wait to see how they translate it, because the game has so many of those iconic moments, so many of those memorable set pieces. It feels like an endless list. What are you most looking forward to over the course of the season?
Man, there's, like you said, there's so many story moments. I'm again, no spoilers here. I'm waiting to see how they treat Sam and Henry, who are two black characters in the series. I just want to know what they're going to do with them in the show. I think that's very important for me to see how that goes down. Other than that, 2 more moments. One, I want to see, again, this is kind of spoilery, but not really spoil. I want to see if they put a giraffe in this damn show. I really have to see that.
Google it if you don't know. Just Google it. Yeah.
Giraffe here. And then last but not least, it's something about zombie apocalypse and hospitals. I really want to see this just hospital stuff, man. I have to. It's just always cool. I don't know. Some of the hospitals that in a pandemic, it just goes down at the hospital, and it tends to be one of the most dangerous places. And The Last of Us is no exception to that. And so I'm over here thinking like, I wonder what, just how that's going to look, how they're going to make it look. I think this show was already shot pretty well, but I'm curious to see how they make it look. And my last thing I add, I can't wait to see these dang clickers, man. Of course, we keep seeing the shot of it. We keep seeing in this episode, we see like the like the cocoon of one is kind of being built on the wall, but I can't wait to see like how they interact with them in the show. I want to see how often they pop up in the show, because of course, in the video game we see them all the goddamn time, you know what I'm saying? But here I'm just curious to see how they use these these crazy mutated humans, as a device, not only for action, but again for what, to propel the story forward in the TV show. So yeah, those are some of the things and moments I'm looking forward to.
Quick follow-up about that with the clickers and things. One of the changes, I forgot to bring this up earlier, but one of the notable changes that they made from the video game to the TV series, no spores, which we know in the video game, that was an airborne element to this viral infection. You had to put mask on, because if you denied, that would infect you. They've taken that out of the show. I would presume it's because you don't want to mask your main characters for good portions of the show. Anytime they would have to go inside a hospital or a building or into darkness and put on a mask, well, that makes it really hard to see Pedro Pascal's face. But what do you think about that? Because that was a huge element in the games. Like there's so many environments and elements where you have to like put that mask on, because if you don't, that means your death.
Shoot, he's the Mandalorian. He would have been fine. No, but it's part of me feels like they could have figured it out, because if I remember right, some of the makeshift masks in the video game were made from like 2-liter of Coke bottles and stuff, where like it's kind of semi-transparent and see-through. In my mind, it would have been nice, like if you include spores, but you don't have to spend too much time on it. You know what I'm saying? Like learn how to like make moments with it and moments without it. Maybe, I don't know. I feel like they could have figured it out, but I understand the decision for sure. But part of me feels like they could have figured it out still. I don't know.
Yeah, there might have been a way, but ultimately, if it's preserved the performances, if they got to a place where they found it to be too difficult, then I would imagine that they probably had a good reason for it. But I'm probably most looking forward to, outside of the things you mentioned, I'm really curious to see the whole section with the character Bill, who's going to be played by Nick Offerman. There's a good section in the video game where you meet this character. He's in this abandoned town, and basically Joel needs him for something, and so they come into contact with each other. But in the game, there are so many funny interactions between Bill and Ellie. They just talk so much shit to each other. They do not like each other at all. It's some of the funniest dialogue, which is, it's kind of surprising about The Last of Us. There's a lot of humor in this as well. And so I think that stuff is going to be really interesting, because I know in the research that they've expanded Bill's story in this. And I think that there's going to at least be a portion of an episode where we get to see his relationship with another character, which is alluded to in the video game, but not really. There's not really much time devoted to it. But I think the relationship between Bill and Frank, which is going to come, I would presume probably episode 3 or episode 4, relatively soon in the season, there will be a lot more that's really developed and showcased to that. But outside of that, the finale is going to be. It's going to be a lot. I think the finale is going to be a lot. It's going to be a mess. It's going to be a big fucking mess, and the way that it's going to end is going to be pretty. I think that they had a shot in the season preview. At the very end of it, you talked about the hospital's point. I think that there was a shot in there, and I was like, "Oh my god!" Like my heart literally dropped because I was like, "I think that's that moment." So yeah, it'll be a great next 8 weeks as we continue to talk about the show. We'll figure out how we'll cover it and how frequently we cover it. But I certainly don't doubt that we will certainly revisit The Last of Us over the course of the next few weeks. But if you checked out the series premiere of The Last of Us on HBO, definitely hit us up and let us know what you think.